Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. On this podcast, we go week to week, watching one of your streaming favorites, providing some conversation and some context along the way. In today's episode, we're talking about the season finale, the 15th episode of season 2 of The Pitt. This is the 6th episode we have published in 7 days. So this has been an exhausting pace, but DTF St. Louis has ended. The Pitt is now over. So now we are down to just 2 shows, back to our usual 2 shows. Darren and I will be discussing Euphoria again, and probably discussing this second season of Beef, the Netflix series. And Sona and I continuing to discuss Your Friends and Neighbors. Relatively little house cleaning this week. As far as calls to action, this week, hey, send us an email, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, or of course, post to YouTube or Spotify. And the Patreon is forthcoming. So stay tuned for that announcement in our next episode. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I'll talk to you soon. All right, Kim. So we've gotten to the final episode, the 15th episode, almost 4 months. And you were just saying before we started recording that you're going to be sniffling on this show. Just to let you know, because I edit all these episodes, you have been sniffling in every single episode for 4 months. You might want to get that.
No, well, now this is sniffling from allergies. That was clearing my throat from the winter cold that never went away.
Excuses.
The green pollen floating around the air is to blame for this, Victor.
If you continue on the show, we'll keep tracking your sniffling.
Let's see how it goes.
Before we get into The Pitt, we will probably, Darren and I will definitely be talking about this, and we're trying to get all the wives on board. We'll see if we can get
all of them.
All the wives. he actually
so many.
He actually has more than one. No, I'm just kidding. Not that I know of anyway. But see if we could have a 4-way conversation about Beef, because Beef apparently was not only something that we've all watched and something I liked very much, but his wife, Faye, also apparently a big fan of that first season. So we've seen about half, and maybe we'll try to watch more of it over this weekend. Maybe we'll be able to finish the whole thing before we have that conversation, but at least partially reviewing it. And this is probably going to be pretty popular. The first show was very popular eventually. Very curious to get your take on Beef 2, Still Beefy.
We did start watching it this week. I think only 3 episodes so far that we've seen, but I really like it, and I definitely want to continue watching it. So I will try to participate in the wifey conversation.
Yeah, I've also been enjoying it very much so far. And it's just interesting there. There's been all these shows recently that are, I mean, specifically this week, but just in the culture at large. I think it's a combination of the wealth disparity where so many people are so incredibly wealthy in the United States, and I'm sure around the world, this is a trend. And yet there is this combination of us all feeling like these incredibly wealthy folks have all the power, but then how that is a trap even for the wealthiest. So interesting that we're talking about Your Friends and Neighbors, and now this show Beef, and to a lesser extent, like basically almost the opposite end of the socioeconomic ladder. We're talking about Euphoria, about these young people right out of college and how they're all hustling, mostly doing illegal things to hustle, or at least illicit things to hustle for cash. And also a show that I've brought up briefly in my conversation with Sona, maybe something we'll be covering week to week. Margot's Got Money Troubles, which with Elle Fanning turning to OnlyFans to support her new baby. So it is just something that's in the ether, and continuously, I mean, specifically with Beef, it's on and on about how we are all in the end selling out. We are like prostituting ourselves for that big cash prize, and specifically in the terms of the Beef show, that even those billionaires are in the end trapped by their own wealth.
Yes, it is an interesting commentary on capitalism and trying to get by while scamming what you can scam to get ahead in life, which is terrible, but apparently what a lot of people seem to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole broader topic, but we were literally just talking this morning about the fact that everybody's scamming, right? It's like, it's our political leaders, it's the culture at large, it's trying to grab people's attention in social media. It's literally financial grift, and it just seems to be, to me, utterly exhausting. And I'm not so surprised that it is continuously in the popular culture as well, considering that it is like the world we all live in, right?
It's quite depressing, actually. Despite the show, Beef specifically, being super entertaining, the message is depressing.
Yeah, and there's been so many of these kind of eat the rich comedies recently with Triangle of Sadness and Send Help this year as well. So these kind of, well, Triangle of Sadness, not really a horror film, but a thriller adjacent, but some overtly like The Menu films that are playing in the horror or at least genre, in those genres. Okay, onto a topic depressing in completely different ways, different reasons, I should say, is the finale of The Pit, which a very quiet and subdued finale compared to season 1, and something we've been seeing throughout the course of the season. Interesting that all these characters have been going on some kind of emotional journey, and by the time we get to the end here, maybe just because they're younger and more resilient, that most of these people feel like they're at some kind of crossroads, whether it's looking to change, like Mohan, for example, change careers, or at least change the focus of their practice, or some of these people just reprioritizing their lives. But in general, the usual type of issues you have in any kind of career, of course, higher stakes in this particular case. But the big focus here, of course, is with Robbie and his continued spiral into depression and worse. But there are some rays of hope here as well in this particular episode. So in general, before we start breaking everything down, how'd you like this episode of TV?
I thought it was very emotional. I liked the way it wrapped up. It was everyone was focused on their emotional situation, which I thought was obviously not as dramatic as the first season, but a good way to close this season after all of the character development.
I think like the fulcrum, the most important point of this season, and obviously in this episode itself, was this conversation between Robbie and Abbott, this scene which I saw your emotional reaction to it, so definitely wanted to talk to you about it here on the podcast. But Robbie's talking to Abbott about, they're going back and forth. He's throwing in Abbott's face that he was suicidal as well, and that Abbott has come to terms with dealing with that by putting his neck on the line with this SWAT team on weekends. So obviously people make fun of him for that as well. There's actually a call out here where Javadi is talking about how dysfunctional everybody is, he basically calls out everybody on the show, which I really like this scene where Javadi does a psychological profile of everyone who's there, except for Whitaker, who she's actually speaking to. But I would love to hear her take on Whitaker, considering she seems to have an opinion on everybody. And she calls out Abbott for, this is how he copes with his misery, is by putting his neck on the line every week with the SWAT team. And Robbie throws some of this in Abbott's face, but he has this quote, and he says, "The most important things I've ever done in my life have been in this hospital. Nothing will ever matter more than what I've done in this hospital, but it's killing me." You know how they say that a part of you dies when you lose someone you love. I'm not convinced that a part of you doesn't die every time you feel a fellow human pass. And I've seen so many people die that I feel like it's leeching something from my soul. And then he also says that he's tired of being a role model and that he's always trying to get ahead, which maybe that does tie in with some of the other themes of these other shows we mentioned. And he says, "I'm tired of feeling like I'm drowning every day. I'm tired of all of it." So, and this really hit you really hard. We were talking about it last night briefly.
Yeah, I see where he's coming from. Obviously, he is depressed and his entire life is wrapped around his work only, and he has no work-life balance, and his only sense of self comes from taking care of patients and watching them die in some instances. His perspective is the perspective of the depressed person. I don't necessarily agree personally that a piece of you dies when a patient dies. I have also seen a lot of patients die in my 20 years, and some of those things stay with you. But I think you think about the situation and what you did to potentially help try to save their life. And so much of this is out of your control, depending on the circumstance. But in my personal opinion, it makes you appreciate the fragility of life and how circumstances can change at a moment's notice. And when you're at work, you focus to do your best job, and people recognize that, when you're performing and helping and everyone's working as a team. But then as a provider dealing with death and sad situations all the time, you have to take that and move on and focus on your personal life and have a work-life balance, because if you just focused on all of the bad things that happen at work, you'd end up like Dr. Robbie, which is he's not in a good position. So it's difficult working in the medical field, but you have to be able to separate yourself from your work, which he hasn't figured out how to do. But at the culmination of this season, you have to think potentially now he's going to figure it out.
Well, we would hope. And so a couple of questions for you regarding that. So obviously, you talk about having that work-life balance. Have you had people in your life or, people who work in this field that had to drop out because they're like, I can't take this? Because I think what you were just touching on is really important. First of all, you could be just predisposed to take things way too personally. And if he has this hero complex, if he's always trying to rescue everybody and he takes this amazing pride in being able to do so, and you put it on yourself that, well, I didn't save that person, I failed, then, when something potentially was impossible, then obviously that's going to be an incredible emotional strain. So some of it is just your own temperament. Can you separate yourself from this? And some of it is, like you mentioned, it's also not necessarily, I was going to say choices. It's not necessarily his choices, but it's just the circumstances of his life. Because if he has nothing to go home to, he talks about here specifically that he pictured himself married and with a couple of kids at this point in his life, and he doesn't have those things. And part of this is probably his lack of work-life balance. He's probably been in relationships where, he would probably be considered quite a catch a few years earlier, like 10 years earlier. Now
I still think he's a catch.
I mean, yes, he could still get married. There's still hope. And someone specifically says that to him in this particular episode. But I mean, you could imagine 10 years ago, 15 years ago, he would be quite the catch. But you can imagine being in a relationship with somebody who has this disposition and is not only beating themselves up about everything bad that happens at work, but maybe in the relationship too. And it would be like utterly exhausting to be with somebody like that, I would presume.
Yeah. I mean, it appears that Dr. Robbie cannot focus on the positive. He cannot focus on the lives he's saved. He's only focusing on the lives that he feels he's failed, whether it's the doctors not being able to help them in their personal lives or not being able to help his patients. So he has no ability to separate. So that explains why he is in this position. Because how can you be in a relationship if all you're doing is focusing on your lack of ability to save that life? That doesn't create a positive person.
Yeah. And in any scenario, you can imagine, is this just his predisposition and is just sitting at home, perseverating over every possible failed outcome? That, of course, would be very bad for a relationship. Or do you bring that home with you, that same perspective, where in the relationship, you're like that, second guessing everything that's happening in the relationship. And then that could be exhausting in the context of the relationship as well. Or the other alternative, and we probably see all aspects of this in Robbie, so maybe all three of these things are true simultaneously, is imagine him going home to somebody, and in that situation, the person seeing, like all these people talking to him right now, you need to take a break. You need to walk outside. You need to get out of here. And then imagine like telling the person that every single day and seeing them repeating the same behavior. This is like Langdon calling him an addict.
The rumination of depression, where you have negative thoughts that keep repeating and you cannot separate yourself. He needs to go on like an LSD trip or ketamine therapy.
Maybe that was the bike trip, like the little peyote or something out of the in Canada, I guess he was going
like
to.
Sever yourself. Like on Severance. Severance is something maybe we should put him on that TV show so he can have a work-life balance because he won't have a memory.
We joked about this when we talked about Severance, right? That'd be like, that would be a good thing to be, basically go to the ER and be in that world and then be able to sever yourself out. But then think about that. The person who was, again, the idea of the innies, now we're talking about a completely different show, but imagine those innies where it's like the second you get out the elevator, you just lost the patient, and then your next moment of consciousness is walking into another emergency room with another disaster, like with no break in between it all. That would be absolutely anxiety-inducing.
I mean, that's what the pit is for these 15 hours, right?
In a way, that's exactly correct. But at least you
cannot get in the elevator. You cannot sever yourself because you cannot physically walk out. He cannot physically leave.
They could at least go have a karaoke party somewhere, possibly.
That is a good therapeutic modality.
So this is obviously terrible for Robbie. And there's another really important scene here with Robbie as well that comes much later on, which is maybe like the shred of like the one beam of sunlight that breaks through these dark clouds in this really beautiful moment towards the end of the episode. But before we get there, let's talk about some of the other characters here as well. First of all, the big case of the week, obviously, is this incredible C-section. So a little bit about this. What you were like, what is a wild pregnancy, right? But,
Yes, this woman who comes in with preeclampsia. So she has hypertension, headache, leg swelling, and she also has HELP syndrome, which is elevated liver enzymes and low platelets, which are kind of all part of this problem. No prenatal care because she wants to have a baby in the wild, quote unquote, meaning no prenatal care because women have been doing that for centuries. And now she's having a medical emergency and could potentially die, as could her child if she doesn't get this treated. And she doesn't even want to have an ultrasound done because it's harmful to the baby. So now we basically have a conspiracy theorist who is potentially going to die if she doesn't get care. So the whole scene of this was very traumatic because obviously the doctors know what the treatment is, which is we have to deliver this baby right now. We have to treat your blood pressure. And she doesn't even want that. But they managed to get some labetalol in her to bring her blood pressure down. And then the scene unfolds in a very bad way.
the statistic here, which I did not have a chance to verify, but someone brings up here that when this patient talks about, hey, women have been having babies in the wild throughout all of history. So
the infant mortality rate, which was commented as 30%.
Right.
I didn't verify that. Did you?
No, I have not. That's the statistic I did not actually verify and how they would be able to verify that. But it did make me think about this, something I always think about, which is just so crazy. The centuries, millennia in which women
died in childbirth,
would get pregnant and die in childbirth. And it was so common. And I've told this story before, not on microphone. I don't think about mic, but we have a old ancient cemetery behind in my town where we live. And we used to go and just hang out there when we were teenagers, like after school or whatever, and smoke cigarettes or whatever we would do. But it still fascinates me. And I think we went there together one time after we moved back here. But it's fascinating to see those old gravestones from the 1700s, because you literally see like a family plot, and there's the father is buried there and he's 75 years old or something. And then they have the other family members, and you can see from the date of birth, like this was the daughter, this was the son. And then they'll have the mother dies at 35 years old. And then they'll have a child that is less than 1 year old who dies at approximately the same time as the mother. And I'm just like, eventually, back in the day, eventually you had kids until one of them killed you. And I'm like, wow, that was just a way of life. It's a shocking thing. I know it's something we don't appreciate. And by the way, all these kind of, I am 100% on board with these influencers and all this kind of crazy over analyzing everything you eat or put into your body, all your activities, all these influencers coming up with all these weird theories. And I always scratch my head and go, if that was true, if you have to only eat these 5 foods, then we all would have been extinct by now. So I'm the first person to be like, this is total baloney. But this specific case, and just, look at the actual numbers, people. Look at those gravestones. All those women died in childbirth.
But we presume that she is going to make it by the end of this episode because she gets an emergency C-section, which of course is done by the ER physicians because they do this in 12 minutes. And it takes the OBGYN 12 minutes to respond to the page. And by the time he gets there, the baby's already out and they've packed her uterus, and the baby is born with a low APGAR score, but eventually starts crying and pinks up and is going to survive. The mom, of course, develops cardiac arrest and is resuscitated. She's having status epilepticus as well. So she is seizing continuously, and then they paralyze her. And of course, they have an EEG right there because that's right there in the ER. They put the EEG on and she's still seizing. So they're trying to wait for her to stabilize before they can take the baby out. And then all the stuff happens. So that's a little, sensationalized, of course, but they're both going to survive.
Yeah. Long and short of it, they're going to survive. And it's very funny. Of course, this is the most well-stocked ER in all of North America, apparently.
They have all the NICU supplies right there. They have the video EEG, maybe not video, EEG, and they can take care of everything right then and there while waiting 12 minutes for the OBGYN to come.
Yeah. all in less than half of an episode, but pretty remarkable. I mean, obviously a lot of this is taken with a lot of leeway, creative leeway here.
We have done emergency C-sections in the ER when I worked there, but it was the OR and the OBGYNs come and do it, not the ER doctor.
Well, yeah, I mean, a more realistic version of this would probably be exactly that. You can imagine that something's happening. The OBGYN folks turn up. The fact that they have the NICU supplies there isn't too surprising, because even in the context of the actual show, you can imagine that they have to wheel it in emergently as this is happening. So a lot of that isn't that, the funniest, of course, for me, the funniest is when the surgeon shows up at the end and he's just like, so what did I miss? What did I miss? Everything. As always, they've missed everything.
Well, her belly is still open, so maybe he can close that. Oh, by the way, the betadine that they put on, they're rubbing it on with their hands, and then they opened up her abdomen. Oh, God. That gave me agita.
You wouldn't do it that way?
No. Just pour the whole bottle of betadine on and then take some sterile gauze. Not your hand. Okay.
They were rushing. They had to rush.
They were rushing.
By the way, next season of The Pitt, this woman is going to be deposition.
She's going to sue their pants off.
Exactly. She's like, I showed up here because my ankles were swollen and they cut me in half.
Yeah, there's definitely a deposition in their future, which won't go anywhere.
Right. But
because
still,
she presented for medical care and they provided it.
Against all of her wishes, they did exactly that. Although she was blind by the end of it, so I guess, and having a seizure, so probably not in the best state of mind. No pun intended.
I don't think she was blind. Anyway.
She was having problems seeing, I think.
And by the way, at the end of that, Abbott thanked Robbie, and Robbie can't even take the positives. He just gives him a thumbs up and walks away. So he's suffering and he can't celebrate his victories even.
That was an interesting moment, because I do think he was happy to have been there. I think he had a very complicated, it's good performance on the Wiley's part. I think he had a very complicated emotional reaction there. Part of that was that he maybe is feeling some, dealing with his, maybe this fantasy of ending everything that's been playing out in his mind. And then I think there is a revelation. That's how I read it anyway, that there's a revelation that then he would not have been here to do this. And I think that's what Abbott's trying to remind him of. So despite all that, he still saving lives. That's one thing he can do. And that's pretty valuable.
Agreed.
He can also rock a baby to sleep pretty well.
Oh, I love that scene. You want to talk about the baby?
I want to leave the baby for last. So let's save him, because that's the most uplifting, maybe the most uplifting thing we see here. Okay, a couple of other really important points. Of course, we have Robbie arguing with Hashimi about her seizure disorder, speaking of seizures. And we get a little more detail about that. She's been seizure-free for quite some time.
Yeah, she hasn't had a seizure in a year until today, and she admits to having two.
That she knows of, right? That's the other thing. I like how she says that, well, whenever it would happen in the past, people just thought she was a pensive person.
Yeah, zoning out for a moment, just thinking about the case. Well, that's when she was first dealing with baby Jane in the beginning of the season. People were focused on her. She was having her absence seizure. And they're like, ooh, what's she thinking? Has she made some secret diagnosis we don't know about? No, she was having a seizure.
Well, it's interesting, by the way, that we've been suspecting that she might be having some kind of PTSD related to pediatric patients. And she specifically calls that as one of her theories is, I haven't had a pediatric patient since she was in Afghanistan. So maybe it is triggering some kind of PTSD.
I think the stress of this is triggering her seizures.
Plus, of course, the stress of the day. She has a new job. It's a chaotic day, to say the least, given the fact that they lost their electronic medical records and all the technology that goes along with it. And she needs her AI. She was that, she couldn't rely on her AI today. I mean, Robbie calls her out and maybe is a little basically saying that you have to tell somebody by the end of the weekend or I will. And he runs that by somebody. He says, who did he ask about the morality of that to one of the other doctors? Who was he talking to?
I don't remember who he was talking to.
He was wondering about what the ethics were. Oh, it was the lawyer, because the lawyer was talking about the deposition again.
Yes. Yeah, he wants to do the right thing and not put his patients at risk and not put Dr. Hashimi at risk. And he asks her, you're not driving, are you? And she was like, well, yeah, I have had no problem in the last year. And luckily, at the end of the episode, when she gets in her car, she actually stops and makes the decision that she should not be driving. But she kind of knows that her job is now on the line.
I was thinking like cliched TV tropes that she was going to have some episode and then run over one of the doctors or somebody else we'd seen on the show earlier. That would be Grey's Anatomy plotting, but
Yeah, that's not Pitt style.
for sure. The Pitt, as unrealistic as some of the medical stuff is pretty realistic otherwise. I mean, have you ever had this type? I mean, have you ever had a type of or heard of situations where like a doctor needs to
Is incapacitated in some way and you need to report them? I have not personally been in that position. I'm sure it's arisen. I mean, I've heard stories of medical providers who have drug addiction and who are
Dr. Death and the Good Nurse?
That, yes.
Yeah.
Dr. Death is a whole nother episode of this podcast. Yeah, where you're doing dangerous things and people are just sweeping it under the rug until it gets to the point where now, patients are dying or patients are at risk, and then these people get reported. But that's the problem, is like you wait until it's so bad that you have no other choice. Like Dr. Death, for instance, who was this criminal neurosurgeon who just went from hospital to hospital having terrible outcomes, and the hospital didn't want the politics and the red tape of having to deal with a physician who was killing people. So they're like, move on, keep going. Just like the nurse in New Jersey who...
Yeah, that movie, The Good Nurse, was based on that, yeah.
Yeah, who was putting insulin in IV bags and killing people with insulin. And they finally caught that person, but it took a while. They went from hospital to hospital, which is just horrendous, that you can't put a stop to bad behavior because you're afraid of the consequences.
Yeah, that's a whole other bigger can of worms here. In this particular case, I mean, it's fascinating, by the way, that and really says something culturally, especially in medicine, when you think about The Good Nurse, that story, that this is literally, he loses his job because they suspect him of being a murderer and they do not disclose this to his next employer, which is insane, right? Really insane.
Insane.
I mean, in what other line of work would it be like, I think this school teacher murdered one of the students, so we fired him, and then he moves to the next adjacent town, and they're like, should we hire this teacher? And they're like, absolutely. Excellent teacher. And did not disclose that, well, we actually fired him because we think he may have murdered some of the students.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
But that's how it flies in the medical world, mostly because of litigation, right?
Yeah. The hospitals are afraid of being called out for having negative they don't want the negative attention of having this terrible situation and terrible outcomes because it'll look bad for the hospital. So move on to another hospital so we don't have to deal with you. Insane.
Yes, I agree. I think everyone agrees with that. And that's why there's been so many podcasts and TV shows, popular shows and podcasts about that very topic, because it does really seem like, and it seems to say something culturally about our cover your ass mentality culturally, to the fact that you're just like passing the buck and you're like, well, if they have to deal with it better than me, which is like this very not really thinking about the next person. And Robbie, on the other hand, to his credit, specifically in the show, is actually trying to do the right thing, I think, in his own way. Part of that could still be his savior mentality and the onus that he puts on himself, that God forbid something bad would happen. I'm sure he would blame himself. We know that specifically. That's how he is. There's also this kind of righteousness about him. So it does tie in, hits multiple points. But I have to say personally, me watching this, that we had this conversation last week when she just introduced this in the final moments of last week's episode, that I'm like, what does happen when she's in the middle of a procedure? If she's just there supervising and she says, look, I'm just there. And she even calls this out. She's like, well, I could have someone there backing me up. But all of that, I think, is totally understandable and feasible. And she can still continue to do her job at work as long as everybody is aware of it. And she is not, if she's had any recent episodes of seizing, that A, people need to know to look out for this behavior in case she is in the middle of something. And B, that if there's something that's really, she can consult in the room, but she should not be touching any patient during some kind of critical procedure if she may seize up. So, and the only way all of that mitigation can happen is for her to be honest about it. So I'm 100% on board with Robbie saying, as a matter of fact, when she starts driving the car at the end of the show, I was like, oh my God, something terrible is going to happen, because it may not happen today. It may not happen for a month, but if she seizes while she's driving, that's a disaster for herself too.
Yeah, she absolutely cannot be driving. And I agree. If everyone knows about this, if you want to continue working as a physician and somehow we can get past the specifics of this, you're right. The staff has to know that she has a problem. And
especially because she's an attending. I mean, here, Robbie, in this particular case, is doing most of the surgeries, but that's not like, I mean, I should say she's the supervisor. So it's not like she needs to be doing every single medical procedure. She can simply be telling the other doctors what to do in her capacity.
Yeah. And her point is, we just need a second attending on shift, which in this type of emergency room,
should have anyway.
They should have like 7 or 8 attendings at once supervising the residents. So yes, please get another attending on shift.
So all of that makes perfect sense. And I think like in a way, she can actually, in my opinion, I don't know what the actual legalities of it are, but in my opinion, she can continue to be doing her job, but only if she's upfront about all of this. She's afraid that it's going to impact her career. And of course, it's something she's only dealing with now because she hasn't had this episodes in a while since she's been taking this medication. But yeah, I mean, it could be something as simple as like, hey, go tell your supervisor this happened, and I'm going to tweak my prescription, talk to my doctor about it. And then, now she's acclimated to her new routine and the stress isn't as bad and she's on her new medication and she goes a whole year without any, great. But like Robbie says, only after you go through that process.
Yeah, she's going to have to do something so that we can get this controlled before she's putting herself at risk again.
Okay, another important point here, of course, and very important character on this show in general. Langdon goes for his urine test. We see it actually happen on screen. And of course, this inevitably he has this is what allows, part of the reason Robbie's hanging around is because he still wants to have this conversation with Langdon. They finally do have a conversation. And Langdon, basically says, I've seen your type before. You are an addict and you need to get help. And it's interesting that Robbie's like kind of been waiting all day to have this conversation with Langdon to basically forgive Langdon. And Langdon even calls him out and says, oh yeah, now you're all on my side because I did that cowboy procedure and I saved that guy with the neck adjustment. And he's like, what if that had gone bad? Then what would you have been saying to me right now? Right.
Yeah, he does definitely kind of throw it back in Robbie's face where he's kind of not okay with the way he's been treated upon his return. And he's calling him out, as every character on the show by the end of this episode has had a one-on-one conversation. You need help right now. End of story. So I don't think Robbie is looking for that, but he's getting it from everyone, including Langdon.
Langdon also goes and checks on his necrotizing fasciitis patient.
Oh, yes. Yes. It is good to follow up to see what the outcome is for your ER patients. Oftentimes in the ER, you just never really know what the next step is. But if you look into it, it's easy to find that information. So luckily she is alive. However, she needed an above knee amputation.
Yeah. So it's going to be a little more difficult for her to be a waitress.
She's young. She'll walk with a prosthetic. She'll do okay.
Sure. What do you think about that when she goes to check on her, she's facing the other way? And I thought, is this a way that she doesn't make eye contact with him so that he can walk out the door? Or was I thinking that actress has not been on the show since like episode 2?
Yeah, that was not an actress. That was probably a prosthetic person.
Or it's an actress who's just like facing the other way so they don't have to match. They don't have to call the actress back in again. Yeah. 4 months after the show started production.
They just showed her amputation stump dressed. So you knew it was her. But yeah, maybe that's why. I did, speaking of prosthetics, at the end of this episode, they have a behind the scenes section, which I thought was really interesting because obviously, some of these things have to be prosthetic, not real people with incisions and various things. But I didn't really think about having the entire lower half of the body as prosthetic and it's just the actor's head or what have you. They showed at the end the actor it was something with the knee and the entire foot was prosthetic and you could see all the veins with a perfect prosthetic special effects thing. And then the actor's legs were underneath the stretcher, which for some reason that didn't dawn on me that all of this person besides their head would be synthetic. So that was kind of interesting.
Honestly, I didn't think about it either. And as a fan of like horror films, and when I was a kid, would read like Fangoria magazine to see how they did all the prosthetic special effects. And this is how old I am. I remember the actual behind the scenes of Kevin Bacon is actually in the very first Friday the 13th movie, and he gets killed. It's like someone puts their hand on his mouth and the arrow goes from under the bed through his throat, right?
Oh, God.
And in the behind the scenes for Fangoria, it's like his head is through the pillow and the body is a prosthetic. And it's very cool. This is 1980 when that movie was made. So this technique has been around, and horror films do this all the time. We saw that behind the scenes for the Del Toro version of Frankenstein, for example, and very cool prosthetics. But the reason I mentioned I did not, even being a fan of horror films and stuff like that, for me, usually the prosthetics are pretty obvious. I have to say the prosthetics on this show are stunning. And the reason I just assumed that, like you had said, that I think the knee is a prosthetic, or they have some kind of thing over the knee so they can imitate the surgery, but the leg is real, which of course, now that you think about it, like they're going so deep into the leg, it would have to be fully prosthetic. But I just didn't even think about that because it's so realistic with hair and everything, veins, the translucency of the skin. It photographs just like a real body. And it's incredible, the prosthetic.
Yeah, it's very impressive because it just appears seamless. It looks real. Like the chest is open. It looks like a real heart. It looks like a real chest. Like, good job to these special effects people.
We can spend another minute on that documentary, which I do recommend everybody see all the extra footage. If you missed it in the actual episodes, by the way, and you want to go back, I know it's a total pain to go and try to fast forward, especially if ads like we do, that you have to wait for the ads to play. But you can actually see all these behind the scene featurettes. When you go to the individual episodes, go to the extras tab. If you go to extras, if they have an individual, these behind the scenes documentaries. And I'm sure, by the way, there's a video podcast of the show that I haven't watched any of, and many of you probably do watch, but I'm sure that this is content that's available there. But this is the correct amount. For me, 4 minutes of behind the scenes is enough. I don't need to see 45 minutes of it, but maybe it would be equally fascinating. So maybe I'm speaking out of turn there. But regardless, do check out this one. And another very cool feature from this particular episode was something I never thought about, because this show is so good at just thinking about all these little details. And I have mentioned this, I think, in my Oscar episode here. I was just talking about when you think about all the behind the scenes artisans that make these worlds real. And I was talking about, for example, like when you watch the movie Sinners, and there's these little shacks which have all been built and then aged, and then the paint has to look like it's been there for 100 years, and then all the bottles on the shelf and the dust on the bottles. This is all done by these people who are decorating that set. And you think about the amazing detail. And this is true of those type of films, but also for a show like this, where I never, again, didn't think about it at all. But in the script, when they say their blood pressure is X over X and it's crashing, that, as we already outlined in an earlier conversation here on the podcast, they actually have a like if you are in one scene and then you're in another scene that they're doing the same day or the same hour, they're shooting it multiple times. So when you're in another room, and if that surgery that we just cut from is happening in the other room, those actors are in the other room reenacting that same scene again. They have to do it over and over again, so all the shots match later on. But not only does that all have to match, all the blood, the amount of blood in the bag, the blood itself on the floor that is pooling, they don't want people to slip in the blood, so they have these gel that they can unroll depending on the volume of blood they want to create on the floor. And of course, what are all the screens saying? They literally show these people in the control room with all the screens up. And depending on what point they are in the script, those blood pressure readings and everything else in all those different rooms have to be a certain one. And they have to rewind to the previous blood pressure readings so that if they want to match a shot, the numbers on the screen match. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah, the amount of coordination
it's incredible.
it takes to pull off this show is mind-blowing.
Right. And most shows like this in the past, you would never even do this. You would never think about, I can see the machine through the window, or I'm shooting a scene like where the doctor's talking about that patient that they were just talking about. And when they were inside the room and they're doing the surgery and they're outside the room in a completely different setup, talking about that patient, the monitor screens have to match. And never thinking about that, but just the level of coordination. And most of the time in shows, you wouldn't do that. They draw the curtain and they have a conversation there on Grey's Anatomy or something. And you don't see what's happening behind the curtain because matching that is going to be a nightmare. This show is in the open and everything's happening through open windows and things. And people are fighting outside. And then we cut to their conversation and we cut back into the room. And all of that just makes this thing feel like it is a living, breathing space. And the reason they can pull that off is because of all this tiny attention to all of this minutia, which is incredible.
Yeah, it really is. you don't appreciate it because it, like you said, it's so seamless. But when they break it down, you're like, wow, the money, the energy, the time that went into filming 1 hour of television is mind-blowing, really.
Yeah, and they show that actually when they're writing the script, they talk about how, the script writers write the dialogue and everything, and then the set people on the right-hand side here's where the people are, like physically in space, and all the dependencies, like these screens have to look like this machine has to be in there, the whatever contraption they're using for the surgery has to be in there, the body's in this position. So you literally have the script with the dialogue on one side, and then with a timestamp on it, and then here's all the other things that are happening in all the other rooms in that timestamp, so that the production people can line all that stuff up. And then this is yet another layer to it where all the technology has to match all of the set design and all of the actors where they're sitting. And they talked about this before, again, in a previous episode, something I didn't think about at all. But the people who are laying in gurneys in the hallways in the background, those people are laying on those gurneys for months at a time because this show takes months to shoot.
I would not want to be an extra on this show. One of those poor waiting room people fanning themselves for months.
Being spritzed with sweat, apparently. Artificial sweat, apparently, according to this documentary, too.
Yeah, it's like when I was watching this, it was only like a 5-minute thing at the end of this episode, but it made me recall, obviously, the Frankenstein movie, where I watched the 45-minute documentary about the making of Frankenstein before I watched the movie. And I enjoyed that more than the actual movie because same thing. It's the same thing you just mentioned, where these intricate prosthetics and costume designs and attention to the dust in the corner and all that stuff is what makes the movie interesting. In this case, I think that is more interesting than the movie. Whereas the Pit, what's happening to the characters happens to be more interesting. This is all in the background. But because it's so realistic, that's what allows you to get pulled into the scenes and focus on not only what's going on medically, but what's going on interpersonally.
And that's my general opinion, by the way. I definitely like certain movies and certain shows that are intentionally very flashy, draw attention to, look at the way I move the camera. Look how long. It's a 20 minutes take, one continuous take. Can you believe it? So there's many things like that are very showy, and I do appreciate those things, and they draw attention to themselves. But I honestly very much prefer like acting that is incredibly subtle. You just believe the behavior because it's not showy. And when editing can be very intricate, but you don't even think about it because it's invisible. And same thing here. Like I brought up Sinners in the past, where you don't think about, man, it must have taken a really long time to dress this set with all the details there. You're just like, this is a real place that's been here for 100 years. You don't think about that for a second, right? And that's like the invisible magic of film. And unfortunately, because it's invisible, usually it doesn't get attention. So do want to shout out these incredible technicians that are able to even make this show believable at all. And it's because you never notice any of these things because they just believe, well, yeah, they're in a room and someone's having surgery in a room next door. It's like, none of that is happening, but you believe it.
Yeah. My best friend growing up is a commercial producer, and she would hire, they called them home ecs, who are people who design the food for the shot in the commercial. And until I heard her describe this, and I saw some of it when I was like back in the day out in Chicago, I helped her with with a shoot as the production assistant, me, the PA student, as a production assistant. Anyway, she's describing how they set up the scenes for just shooting a piece of food, which is all fake, but you would never know it because this person's job is just to design a realistic piece of food. So all these details go into all these things that you don't even think twice about when you're watching it on TV. So good job, all of you home ecs and set designers and costume designers and cinematographers. Everyone works together to make these things happen.
Yeah, those people do not get the attention, of course, that the people in front of the camera do. Okay, a couple minor points that I want to bring up, mostly just entertaining ones. First, this is kind of a comedic beat, even though it's tragic. A patient's been sitting there all day long and dies in the waiting room. Is this something, a DB, is this something that... Is this something you have to do? Have you ever heard of happening in your experiences?
I have not seen that happen in my career, where someone's just dead in the waiting room and nobody really realizes it, except for there's a little suspicion by the guy sitting next to him, I think there would be a little more attention called to the situation. Like, you die, you slump over, you appear to be not breathing. This guy's just sitting perfectly upright, but appears slightly blue.
I think if he had collapsed onto the floor, by the way, then he would have been attended.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I'm not sure many people die and just stay in one place frozen, but I don't know. Rigor mortis.
This would be funny, though. I mean, this is a funny moment in the show where the person sitting there is like, I think he's dead. He looks dead to me. And what did the doctor, he did diagnose him as being like,
oh, like he's got hyper-narcolepsy.
hyper narcolepsy or something. Yeah.
He's really, really sleepy.
Yes. He looks like he's dead because he's so sleepy.
That is pretty fun.
And another little comedic beat here. Where has Whitaker's ID gone?
Oh,
where is this missing
hilarious.
Unhoused man? And also, we weren't asking this question until they showed it in the previously on at the beginning of the episode. But where is that mannequin as well? So
yeah, there we have Digby wearing Whitaker's ID, pushing the 4th of July mannequin in a shopping cart, talking to her like a normal person. That was very entertaining after Whitaker was freaking out for the previous episode about his ID.
And I have two specific things I want to talk about at the very end. But before then, I had speculated maybe what they could have done in this episode would be to exit the hospital. Because I'm like, what else could they do? And it ended up being this very, very mundane episode. But I wanted to see them exit the hospital and show them outside. And we kind of see a little bit of that here. Definitely with the rooftop scene, which I want to talk about in just a moment. But before then, what did you think about Whitaker? And, you see him outside here as far as, and you see Robbie smiling at this, as far as being able to have a work-life balance. And everybody's worried that Whitaker's maybe like too invested in this relationship with this woman. But she rolls up in her truck and they have like a whole routine. She runs over to the passenger side and he gets into the driver's side after saying hello to the baby and putting on his funk music. We know he's a white boy who likes some funk, even though he's a farm boy. That's still his preferred type of music. And then drives off into the sunset, literally in this case. But what'd you think about this? Like showing that he does, as committed as he is to work and becoming very Robbie-like in work. Is Robbie seeing this kind of an idealized version of him? Or maybe this was who Robbie was early in his career before he became so worn down by the job.
That's possible. I think it is a way for Robbie to reconcile his, sabbatical because he's worried about everybody. And then he sees Whitaker as a potential caretaker, driving the car, having a personal life, having a work-life balance, which Robbie doesn't have. So I think it's a way of kind of settling that with him because he is the father to all of these residents and younger doctors. So I think maybe that's just a way for him to feel okay with leaving because Whitaker will be okay.
And of course, another outside of you have to hang around for the credit sequence actually here, but Mel and Santos singing very badly, although we shouted out the fact that she's a really talented singer, actually, the actress herself, but singing a little Alanis Morissette and getting it all out at the end of the day.
Mel gets her ponytail taken down by Santos, and then she's shaking her hair in the breeze, and they're both singing terribly, but it's like cathartic. Meanwhile, if I were them, I would be asleep because Santos has fallen asleep while trying to finish her charts, and it's hour 15, and they probably have to go to work the next day, but you got to let out steam. So there you go.
I know by the time they get home and then sleep for 10 hours, probably after this day, they're going to wake up and have to get dressed and go back to work.
Yeah, exactly. I also liked that Santos was not singing well because her comment to Mel was sometimes you just got to just scream it out in karaoke, get it out. Obviously, she's a talented performer and singer, but in this scene, she had to, belt it out.
My question is, are these 20-something-year-olds, they're not, in our generation, Alanis Morissette was, lots of angry women were singing Alanis Morissette, but is this still your go-to song when you're 25 years old? Isn't there like Olivia Rodrigo or something that they could be singing to get it all out?
I don't know. If anyone who's in their 20s listening to the show, let us know what song you would personally want to rage out to after work, karaoke style.
I mean, these kids today on Spotify, our daughter and her friends, they're 10 years old and they know all of those classics. So maybe it is still Alanis Morissette.
I mean, maybe. I was out to dinner the other day with my PA colleagues in Westfield and Alanis Morissette from that album, Jagged Little Pill, was playing in the restaurant. So
I remember one time going to a concert there's a bunch of goth kids hanging out before the concert in this parking lot, and they're playing Depeche Mode. And these kids were all like 19, 20 years old. And I'm just like, these goth kids are still listening to Depeche Mode 40 years later. They haven't replaced Depeche Mode yet in the playlist.
Well, it's just like when we went out to our neighbor's 40th birthday and we were amongst 20-somethings plus our 40-year-old neighbor, and everyone in the entire bar was singing Bohemian Rhapsody together as a group. And we're just like, wow, this is great.
Yeah. And the median age in there was they were also singing like Dancing Queen and stuff. And I'm like, these kids are all 20 years old, 20, I guess 22, or fake IDs, and they're 19 because we're in a college town. But they still all know all these songs.
I think we sound like my mom right now because my mom heard me singing a Beatles song like sometime in the last 5 years. And she says, "You know this song? Are you crazy? Of course I know this song." So now listen to us.
I have to say, I think, this is a total digression. We'll get back to talking about the Pit again, but I do think that the Spotify has changed that bit where like
exactly.
you did not used to have, like, when we were growing up, the Beatles were still like very popular on any rock radio station, whether it's classic or contemporary. You just heard the Beatles. It was in the ether. It was on soundtracks, etc. But I think now the kids know the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and the Rolling Stones and Queen and ABBA. And by the way, they'll listen to all that. They don't have these kind of ghettos of music like they used to in the past. And Dr. Dre, they know everything because it's just, hey, it's a popular song from the past and it's on some Spotify playlist they have, and they know all of it. It's all available. They don't have to buy it. Just come spin it up. We used to save up our money to buy that next CD, and then we heard every track on it because it's like, we couldn't just be like, I'll just listen to these 2 or 3 songs and then put it onto a mix on Spotify.
And to continue our digression, you can also get lyrics that just pop up on your phone, as opposed to when I was a teenager, sitting in my room, writing down words, pausing the tape, trying to figure out what they're saying, writing down. I remember writing down the lyrics to Ice Ice Baby. Hilarious.
There's always rap songs that everybody was trying to learn the lyrics to. Okay.
Back to the Pit. Sorry,
to the Pit.
excuse us.
Probably the two, aside from that one early scene where Robbie confesses where he's at, his despondency, the two most important scenes of this episode, and maybe of the season itself, Robbie with the baby, and of course, Dana's been trying to find. By the way, just briefly bringing up the fact that Dana and him, their chemistry seems to have gone back to the same flow. They're, bouncing back and forth. So a lot of that arguing they've had in the past couple episodes seems to have been alleviated. Maybe speaking to the fact that things are getting more back on track, even from an interpersonal standpoint. But really important here that they've been trying to find what is this thing where you can be a foster if you're a medical provider? Have you heard of this before?
I wanted to look into that and I didn't. I have never heard of that. I don't know if it's a thing. So we'll have to do research because she is wandering around the ER like, any doctor or nurse want to be this substitute foster? Okay. Is that a thing? I don't know.
I like when she asks Santos, who's like sleeping at her skateboard. I'm like, I'm not sure if you're sending that woman home with a baby.
But obviously, as she's doing this is alluding to the fact that now, could Robbie become a dad? It's brought out when he's outside talking to Mohan and saying how, as you mentioned before, he says, I have no wife, I have no kids. I imagine myself with 2 kids in a pond and, playing hockey on the pond in the winter. And she's like, well,
it's not too late.
It's not too late. And then you have Dana all episode walking around seeing if she can find someone to foster the baby. I'm like, well, obviously now we are alluding to the fact that could Robbie do this? And then this very heartwarming scene at the end where he's talking to himself via the baby and rocking the baby to sleep. And you picture like maybe he could find a new purpose for his life. Obviously, he cannot be a foster parent right now. He needs to go get himself worked on first so he could potentially be a parent. But maybe that's what we see in the next season where he rehabs himself and becomes a foster parent. That would be great, actually.
I would love to see that. Unfortunately, Noah Wiley's been doing interviews because they're starting to shoot season 3 right now because this is like a production schedule where they're 11 months in between seasons. So, they're shooting it now so that they can finish editing and doing all this behind the scenes work and maybe reshooting scenes, etc., to have it ready for next January. But his description of the next season is Robbie hits rock bottom. And I'm like, oh man, can we handle more of this?
No, I want him to be rehabbed.
Maybe he gets rock bottom then in the course of one day, rock bottom and bounces back up again, all the way back up.
Maybe he just goes swimming in a river and touches the rocks and comes back up.
That's his life right now. But the beautiful scene with the baby, and I love the fact that he is talking to talking to himself. We find out here, by the way, importantly, that his mom abandoned him when he was 8 years old, but he worked it out, and like there's been beautiful things. You have so many people you're going to meet, so many people you're going to love, and that's him saying that to himself as well, which I thought was really a beautiful scene. And what an adorable baby.
I know. I want that baby. I'll foster that baby. Do you mind?
A little bit. As long as he doesn't have to sleep here, we'll watch him during the day, and then can someone else watch him we'll get a night nurse.
You work from home. You could take care of a baby.
Oh
no! Oh no!
Night nurse place. Very cheap thing to have a night nurse, of course.
Well, that's what Dr. Robbie could do if he wants to become a foster parent. He would hire a nanny and a night nurse so he could have help while he works. Then he can come home and take care of the baby.
He's getting those fat ER doctor checks, Okay, and the last scene, of course, is the final scene. Maybe the final scene, I believe. I can't remember which one of these.
The baby was the
final scene. The baby's the final scene? Okay, I couldn't remember.
The fireworks scene with all the staff was quite nice.
Yeah, so I touched on this yesterday when we discussed it briefly, which is, I think I was like, oh, what is the 4th of July about? It's going to be all these crazy fireworks, spectacular disasters, people blowing their hands off. And we saw a little bit of that. We see somebody who blew off part of their head come in at the last second, and Robbie's like, okay, I'm not taking that case. But it seems like, that is part of the Abbott even says, hey, you love this job. when else are you going to see someone blow off part of their head off with the fireworks? But that it was a version of the show that I actually had predicted. That's why this was set on 4th of July. But actually, I think thematically, they're trying to make this about the 4th of July in the fact that we see these people on that rooftop. We have Indian people. We have the Filipino nurses. We have these brown and black people and female people, this very mixed faces with the fireworks going off over Pittsburgh. And this is the face of medicine now, which has changed significantly, actually called out by, I forget her name now, but Dana's friend who she brings in to help with the analog system. She seems annoyed, looking askance when people are talking and they're not speaking English. And she's just like, what's going on over here? Because she's more old school. And we were touching on this. It's not only that the face of medical dramas, which, 30, 40 years ago were probably almost all white men in these roles traditionally, that it's not only that these TV shows have cast these roles very differently, but the actual makeup of the people who are now providing our healthcare services is very different in the past 20 or 30 years because America's makeup has changed a lot. And of course, with the whole ICE storyline here, it is very much a story of America. And this is just a microcosm of America inside of this emergency room.
Yes, that is a good point. I thought that was a nicely filmed scene where Dana's hugging Perla and everyone's just finally relaxed, tuning out to watch the fireworks. But yes, you do see this microcosm of our population and how everyone can work together.
Yeah, you can achieve great things when we work together. Just like this show. All right, that's it for this season. And Kim, I will try to find some other medical drama that we can keep talking about here on the podcast.
I don't think anything would compare to the Pitt unless you want to rewatch ER.
Let's start watching Grey's Anatomy, and we'll do all 25 seasons of that show.
Hells no.
We'll do it on the Patreon. There you go.
No one will pay for that.
You never know. You never know. All right. Thanks again for the conversation. We have to go pick up our daughter.
Let's do it.
And maybe adopt a cat as well.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for having me on your show, Victor.
And maybe you come on to the next episode and talk about beef.
I'll try. I don't know if 4 of us can all contribute.
Huddle around the microphone. We'll be two microphones.
We in New Jersey and Darren and Faye in Australia.
On the other side of the world.
I think we can do it.
We'll figure it out.
Until next time.
Until next time. Whatever that is.